Good morning, everybody. Could you please take your seats? We're going to get started in time. So, good morning and welcome to the 2019 ISPA Aseptic Conference. It's the 28th year running for this conference, so we're very pleased to have this big crowd here today. And I think we have a good program together, so thanks for coming. My name is Jörg Zimmermann. I'm with FETA in Germany. I'm head of the Vice President for the Development Service at FETA. And as you can hear, I've got a cold, so no hugs and kisses from me today. We do something for the first time this year, which is a live stream. So people were able to register for this conference for a live broadcast. And I'm happy to announce that we have people from Germany, from the US, from Spain, from Switzerland, from the UK, all joining us live today. So that's going to be a new interactive thing as well. So first thing on the agenda, I would like to encourage you to download the conference mobile app, the ISPE app in the App Store. Very useful for updates and the program overall. For those who have interest in in-depth classroom training, there's a classroom training scheduled for after this conference, March 20th and 22nd. Essential topics in cleaning validation, HVAC, quality management systems, manufacturing operations. So if you're interested in that, visit the registration desk for more information. The presentations of those speakers who have agreed to share the content are posted on the conference website after the conference, and new and revised presentations will be posted and will be available up to the 3rd of April. Another thing that I would like to point out is the Pigeonhole interactive question and answer for the regulatory panel on Tuesday night. So you can go ahead and put in your questions. There's some there already. You can also vote for the questions, so we get a ranking of what is important for people, and that way we can get a good session with the FDA representatives. Final housekeeping note, please take a moment and silence your phones. And I'm sure still one or two will go off, but let's give it a try. And without further ado, I'd like to announce our first speaker. John Bonas, the CEO and President of ISPE, is going to address you. John's been with us for a couple of years. Before joining ISPE, he was the CEO of the World Federation of Hemophilia. He's also worked for the American College of Cardiology, and he spent some time as a diplomat in Japan, right?
Hi.
Hi. Okay. Thank you very much. So, John, it's your turn.
Tomo arigato, Zimmermann-san. Good morning. What a pleasure it is to be here with everyone today. I think at what is probably the largest ISPE aseptic conference ever. So this is a fantastic turnout. In its 28 years of hosting this aseptic conference, I don't think we've ever seen as big a turnout as we have this time. So we are very appreciative of your participation, your attendance today. I also want to take the opportunity to recognize and thank someone who's here with us in the audience for actually having kicked off this idea 28 years ago, and that's Jack Lisford. So I don't know where Jack is sitting here, but why don't we give Jack a big round of applause. There he is, all the way in the back. Thank you, Jack, for your vision. I also wanted to acknowledge and thank everyone who made possible the streaming. This is, I believe, the first time that ISPE offers streaming of its educational sessions. It's something that we want to continue to do as an organization, because as Jörg mentioned, we want to be able to reach different parts of the world who don't have the access to be able to come to these events. So the fact that it's being streamed to Europe and everywhere, and everyone and people around the world have access is fantastic. So I want to express my thanks to staff and to the program committee for making this happen. Let's see here. Is there a clicker here?
What do you do?
The clicker? Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, there we go. Thank you to the program committee. As many of you know, this educational conference wouldn't be possible without the robust planning that takes place, the selection of topics, and the Aseptic committee is one of the committees that actually begins its work maybe a year before its actual conference, so it's one of the most efficient ones that we have within the constellation of ISPE committees. So thank you to everyone on the program committee. I also want to thank the local Chesapeake Bay area chapter or our local members for supporting this event. You'll hear a bit more from Ben, who's the local chair, but we're very appreciative in your dissemination efforts, Ben. Last summer, most of you who are ISP members received an email from us telling you that we were embarking on a new strategic plan for the years 2020 and 2022. Many of you participated in that consultation process. I want to let you know that we're in the process of compiling all of the feedback that you provided to us, so we continue to be that relevant society to all of you. So expect more throughout the year to hear more details on the new strategic plan, but I can tell you that what won't change is the fact that we're going to continue hosting robust programs such as FOIA. We're going to continue offering symposia such as annual meetings. We're going to continue to offer excellent networking opportunities around the world. We're also going to continue to offer training. And as some of you may or may not know, we have a new ISPE training center located less than a kilometer away from here, actually about 5 or 6 blocks from here. So if some of you have the opportunity to have a look at and have the time, we'd love to be able to host you there. As you can see, we have 34 training courses this year, and for this audience, what is of note is that we have an aseptic processing, an Annex 1 course that was developed and that is being offered. So thank you to the volunteers who made this happen, and now it is available to actually participate in a training course on Annex 1. We're also going to continue in our new strategic plan to move in a digital fashion, so that we're going to continue to offer our flagship magazine in a digital mode. We've heard you, and you've told us that guidance documents are one of the more significant member benefits. Well, we're going to continue to place our resources into the development of guidance documents, make it easier for you to access them electronically, but also work on themes that are pertinent to what you do, such as the Sterile Product Manufacturing Facilities Guide that came out last year, and this new good practice guide on process validation that was just released, I want to say maybe about 2 weeks ago. There's also going to be a workshop, by the way, on process validation during the summer, so look out for more information on that. What we're also going to continue to do is to develop our ISPE Foundation. And this is the charitable arm of ISPE, where we solicit funds so that we can underwrite travel grants for students to participate in ISPE conferences and trainings, and also to offer scholarships to women in pharma to participate in ISPE conferences. So as you can see, we were thrilled that last year we were able to offer 14 travel grants. This is something that we want to continue to do going forward. I mentioned Women in Pharma. This is another program that we will continue to place our focus on. We will continue to promote because of the disparities that many of you know exist within our sector. So this is something that we're firmly behind. We're very fortunate to have many of the female senior executives that have developed this initiative here with us. If you do have an opportunity, I would ask you to maybe approach Charlotte or Fran Zip, who are here with us, to learn more about how you can get involved. What won't change is our dialogue with the regulatory agencies. And as you can see, throughout the year, we continue to have conversations with different agencies around the world. Today, we're extremely privileged to have Mr. Rick Friedman with us today. But as you can see, we have dialogue with PICS, MHRA, Anvisa, and all sorts of different agencies throughout the globe. So if you participate in one of the ISPE symposia, it's highly probable that you'll be able to have this type of conversation in a very informal setting with a regulator. I'm winding up now. I want to also draw your attention to what is the biggest gathering for ISPE within Europe, and that's the ISPE European Annual Conference. We're very lucky to have with us one of the chairs actually here with us today, and Jean-François Dullier. Jean-François, why don't you stand up? He's flown here from Paris, France, and thank you for coming, Jean-François. And if you want to know a bit more about this highly content-rich program that we've developed in Dublin, Ireland, I invite you to have a conversation with Jean-François. It's going to be a series of excellent tracks, as well as socializing, and to cap it all off, we're also going to be visiting, I think, something that's related to process engineering, and that's the Guinness Brewery, right? Right. That's a process engineering visit, right? Okay. I just wanted to make that clear. Okay. So we hope you can make it to Dublin. Some upcoming ISP conferences, biopharmaceutical manufacturing. ISP will continue to play its part there. We're going to Boston. It'll be bookended by the process validation workshop. At the end of the year, we'll be hosting the regulatory conference, our inaugural one, right here in December. Look for more information on that coming out soon. And lastly, I invite you to participate in what is the most, I would say, largest meeting that ISP holds in its entire calendar, and that's our annual meeting. This year we'll be going to Las Vegas. I hope to see many of you there. In Philadelphia last year, we broke new records in terms of attendance, so we have a high bar to achieve for Las Vegas, and it promises to be a great event once again. Thank you for coming to Aseptic, and I wish everyone an excellent conference. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Exciting times at ISPE and so many things happening, so it's great to be here. I would like to introduce our next speaker, Ben Skoronsky. Ben's with CRB as the Director of Business Development in the Mid-Atlantic region. He graduated from University of Maryland and has been working in the architectural engineering and construction engineering industry for over 13 years. Before joining CRB, he was with Hydro Services, working on high-purity water systems, and he is the president of the Chesapeake Bay Area chapter of ISPE, and that's the function in which he'll be speaking to us. So, Ben, please take it away.
So first, I'd like to thank ISPE for starting this tradition. I guess it just started about a year ago, where they allow the local chapter to come out and give you a little bit of a taste and flavor of the area. So I'm here today to speak with you briefly about the Chesapeake chapter and what we have going on in this region. We refer to this region as the BioHealth Capital Region. But first, I've also been asked to briefly touch on one of the newest groups within ISPE, and that is the Women in Pharma Group. This group is an inclusive group that supports both women and men across the ISPE network. The Sterile Products Processing COP Steering Committee and the Show Planning Committee for this show include two very distinctive leaders of the Women in Pharma Group. Charlotte Frugard, who's right here in front of me, from NNE, who recently has been recognized for all of her service to ISPE with the Richard B. Purdy Distinguished Achievement Award. Charlotte has been a member of ISPE since 1995 and is a past chairman of the International Board of Directors. She is co-founder of the ISPE Nordic affiliate in 2000 and was the chair of the Nordic affiliate in 2006 through 2007. She is a member of ISPE's Sterile Products Processing COP Steering Committee. If you see Charlotte around, please thank her for her service to this very important Women in Pharma group. Secondly, my colleague from CRB, Krista Myers. She is the current International Chair of Women in Pharma and is a member of the ISPE Sterile Products Processing COP Steering Committee and one of the session planners for the containment track that will be happening as part of this conference. Krista and the other Women Pharma Steering Committee members are dedicating to supporting the women and men in pharma and by starting Women in Pharma groups in each chapter and chapters around the world. Unfortunately, Krista cannot make it here today, but if you have any questions, again, please find Charlotte. And then I also wanted to point out as our women chair for the local Chesapeake chapter, Jacqueline Watson, who's also with us today. Jacqueline's in the back there. And Franzit.
Franzit?
Yep.
From the board.
Okay, perfect. So welcome again to the Chesapeake, the biohealth capital region. Up here you see our beautiful cities that kind of cover our area. The Chesapeake chapter falls between Northern Virginia and Delaware, including DC and Baltimore, which you see both of those up here. Our chapter highlights. This chapter was founded in 1994 by Dr. Tony Morera, who still plays an active role in the ISPE community. We have over 300 members. As I mentioned, we're known as the Biohealth Capital Region. Our membership is comprised of professionals from operating companies, service providers, equipment manufacturers, regulators, young professionals, and students. Our largest membership, which probably makes us a little bit different than most, is the FDA. We're home of 2 FOIA winners, AstraZeneca and Emergent. It's the AstraZeneca plant up in Frederick, Maryland, so just about 20 to 30 minutes up the street from here, and then the Emergent Bayview facility in Baltimore. This region is comprised of 2,300 different life science companies. There's over 500 biotech companies. A lot of people don't realize that in just this small area here that there's that many companies within this industry. We have a wide variety of life science industries. We have biopharma and defense, genomics and therapeutics, diagnostics and med devices, nutraceuticals and vaccines, personalized and regenerative medicine, and health IT. This area is first in NIH research and development contracts. As many of you are aware, NIH is just a quick 5-minute drive south on Rockville Pike here. It's first in federal obligations for research development through the FDA, USDA, NIH, and NCI. Again, you can get to any of these campuses and labs within a short 20-minute drive from where we're at today. And then we're also first in the concentration of employed doctoral candidates, including universities such as Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland. The last part that I really want to highlight is that this region is rapidly growing. It's been our goal as a local chapter to keep up with the growth of the biohealth capital region. We have over 2,000 job openings in 2019 within the biopharma industry, all of those positions being within an hour of where we're at today. There's been a 700% increase in VC funding, and so we're just trying our best to keep up here. If you have any questions about our chapter and where we're headed, please find myself or any of the other local folks that will be joining us this week. Just to give you a little taste of what we have going on here in the near future. Just next week, we have our 2019 Mass Showcase. That's our biggest event of the year. We already have over 500 companies signed up, 80+ vendors showcasing at the event. A very exciting keynote speaker from Autolus, a new cell and gene therapy company that just moved to Maryland, and an after party. From there, in April, we have the Women in Pharma Lab Tour. Again, if you have any questions, please find Jacqueline. In May, we'll be doing a tour of United Therapeutics. And it sounds like this is a popular thing amongst ISPE right now, but in June, we're doing a local tour of the Guinness factory here in Baltimore. So lots of Guinness going around ISPE this year. Again, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming out. We're very proud to be a host of this largest aseptic conference ever. Let me know if you have any questions and enjoy the sessions.
Thanks, Ben. Great to see such an active chapter in this area. Lots of things happening, and basically brewing is biotechnology, right? It's where we're at. Okay, now we're coming to our keynote speaker, Rick Friedman. Does he need introductions? No. Well, I'll do a quick one, right? So Rick is the Deputy Director of Science and Regulatory Policy, Office of Manufacturing and Product Quality within CEDA. He joined FDA back in 1990, and he's authored several publications and was awarded numerous prizes, including things like the Kenneth Chapman Achievement Award and things like that. But he's also an adjunct faculty member of Temple University School of Pharmacy. From his background, he has a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Montclair State University and Master of Science in Microbiology from Georgetown. And before joining FDA, he was also in industry with Parker Davis. So, Rick, you've got a great presentation prepared for us, and we're looking forward to hearing the latest from FDA. Thanks.
So keep track of timing up for this year. So this is pretty cool. Largest aseptic conference ever. I think I went to probably the second or third isolator conference that Jack held with Mike Porter and Bob Sawsville and I went, and I think we've been here every year since. I think I may have missed 1 year. FDA has always been a very big supporter of these conferences, and they really made a big difference. There's been difficulty in some sectors of the industry with uptake of innovative technology. And I think that ISPE's work was the single most important thing in the evolution from the old legacy aseptic processing operations to isolator technology and other barrier technologies. Truly. Obviously, the journey continues, so I'm going to talk about that today. I was asked to speak from Hai and Jorg about the topic of the state of aseptic processing, current findings and learnings. There we go. And so these are my topics today: current state of aseptic processing, life cycle quality risk management, which is at the foundation of an effective pharmaceutical quality system, along with knowledge management. Innovation opportunities, show drug inspection findings, and a summary where I will, again, talk a little about modernization. So let's talk about the current state of aseptic processing. The history of aseptic processing is replete with incidents in which a loss of environmental control in production or a breach in container closure integrity led to non-sterile parenteral or ophthalmic drugs. Tremendous advances have been made in aseptic processing technology, and a substantial number of operations have been modernized. Yet, data and regulatory findings show that non-sterility problems continue to occur with surprising frequency, and these issues overwhelmingly occur at facilities with lower capability technology. Of course, in this industry, the customer, the patient, in other words, the patient underscores how important it is to mitigate and eliminate risks where possible. Parenteral medications are already given to already very vulnerable people. Their medical conditions, if you think about it, the people who get injections, usually when you've had an injection in your life or a loved one, it's mostly when people are, most vulnerable, with the exception of vaccines. Examples include immunocompromised patients, elderly, neonates, or other infants, pregnant women, or trauma patients. In short, if a firm distributes non-sterile units, the patient receiving the drug is exposed to an intolerable risk and preventable risk. So let's start to explore how we got where we are today in terms of the advances, but also the fact that we have still some way to go. ISPE leaders actually recognize this. FDA had been talking about it with industry since about 1999 or 2000, the need to think about a 21st century in which the legacy technology is updated. And ISPE did work in their International Leadership Forum, which I think has been renamed since then, but still exists. And they created a document they called the GPS document, Global Positioning System. And I guess the idea was very clever, was to think about the direction of the industry going forward. So this document, just a couple highlights from it, said that current facilities, and this is in 2012 when this was published, have been built using technologies and processes from the 1950s and 1960s. And they were both inefficient, not good for the business, and they were also not always capable. So most of the document explored what manufacturing capabilities are needed, and in short, modern facilities and technologies was emphasized, and appropriate staff competencies. A more highly skilled manufacturing organization, it said, will be required to deal with the new technologies. However, the improved automation and process control should bring staff cost savings. So the intimation from the document intimated that the facility of the future, the time for the facility of the future is now. And here we are 7 years later, and more progress has been made, gradual progress. It will not be surprising to the many engineers in the audience that inadequate manufacturing capability has been at the root of many serious quality problems and drug shortages over the years. In this quote from Dr. Janet Woodcock of CEDAR, she's our center director, she notes that some of our inspections have found operations with antiquated or obsolete facilities or processes with high defect rates. And this is in testimony to Congress. And in the testimony, she actually cited ISPE's industry survey on the causes of shortages, which cited lyophilization and sterile manufacturing as two areas in need of improvement. Some of these sites, she said, had been upgraded over the years in testimony, and she said that those more dependable sites were now being de-emphasized by FDA's risk-based inspection program. And more on that later. So most of you know that FDA has also published multiple papers on the state of manufacturing and quality. Again, in this paper, our Center Director, Dr. Woodcock, and an FDA economist, who I believe is now at HHS, Marta Wyszynska, they stated that some facilities at the heart of the drug shortage problem were in operation since the 1960s and had limited upgrades over the last several decades. Notably, the paper also mentions the opportunity to use isolators and other separation technologies to better protect the sterile product from contamination hazards during aseptic operations. It adds that aseptic line design vulnerabilities create the conditions under which ISO 5 environmental control can be rapidly lost due to poor aseptic technique or clean room activities close to the production line. And you see, the paper did get pretty technical. It talked about equipment that is not well maintained, repeated or extensive manual interventions that often occur due to mechanical problems and temperamental manufacturing lines. And it talks about the situation where you have essentially an open line of very limited barriers, and manual activities are happening next to the line in an insufficiently protected line, you may actually have activities in the, what I guess we call, we might say ISO 7 or class 10,000, or the Europeans would say grade B environment. Those activities are very influential because you have open process, not a closed process, and they raise the risk of microbial contamination. So, for aseptic processing operations in particular, special early emphasis must be placed on selecting the right design concept. There's a lot of reasons behind this. The low detectability of contamination in biotech and in sterile manufacturing calls for more risk mitigation upstream in the design stage, and more anticipation of what kind of problems can take place, because downstream quality control tests are extremely unlikely, although they do sometimes do so, but they're extremely unlikely to detect non-sterility or viral contamination among those for biotech and other type of contamination. So a robust design is critical to support ongoing manufacturing reliability. And manufacturing reliability, as I started to establish early on, assures two key things for any producer of goods: quality and supply. Everything is dependent on manufacturing consistency. So the good news is we are all aiming for the same thing: robust manufacturing practices and business dependability. GMP is GBP, good business practice. The true test of a company's quality system is whether it can deliver consistently high quality products to consumers, and this of course is particularly important in the pharmaceutical industry, as I've outlined. So the question is, why aren't we there? Why do we still have these surprising number of non-sterility events occurring? Well, a lot of that comes down to how good your quality system is and, governance, quality governance, managing risks. So let's spend a few minutes looking at the type of QMS, or PQS, that manages life cycle risk in a way that ensures reliable manufacturing and supply. An effective quality system prevents patient exposure to defective products. The product doesn't make it out the door. If there's a defect or if there's a problem, it's caught upstream at the facility. Patients are never exposed to these risks. And they do that, that system accomplishes that by designing facilities, equipment, and processes soundly and detecting and correcting emerging problems before there's a quality consequence. An organization of a strong quality culture will consider consistent operational performance and product quality to be top priorities. And we've begun to understand in recent years that the extent to which a company invests in technological capability provides major insight into the culture of the company. Let me say it again. The extent to which a company invests in technological capability provides major insight into the culture of the company. It is not only about the credo. It is about the manufacturing infrastructure, the investment in capable processes, equipment, and facilities, and the people who work at the site and run the operations. Good quality governance means that senior leaders will create real fixes that are long-term and systemic rather than short-term patchwork solutions. A few more words about the executive role in quality system governance. Senior management has a critical ongoing oversight role to ensure suitability of operations, design, control, maintenance, and infrastructure at a facility may be unreliable or low capability from the outset, not appropriate for new product demands, or equipment and facility degradation, the aging facility we like to call it, may have occurred over time. A great QMS principle that many leaders rightly emphasize is, if you expect the system to work, you cannot forget your own individual role in making it work. Said another way, you cannot shirk your individual responsibility if you expect our system to work, if you expect the system to work. Leaders, again, are making the right point. Now, that principle applies to leaders too. There are times when equipment and facility upgrades are necessary or other major investments are needed, and sometimes that does not happen until it's too late, when there have already been negative quality, safety, and regulatory outcomes. And here's a good model of how well-designed operations will prevent failures. When there are gaps in technology, processes, systems, staff competencies, or management oversight, then those holes in the system can create the conditions for failure. Can you go backwards? How do you go backwards? Okay. So that was supposed to be Swiss cheese. Somehow, most of the cheese is missing, but there's holes. So anyway, that's Swiss cheese. That's the Swiss cheese model, the famous James Reason Swiss cheese model. Latent risks, and they all conspire to cause failure on certain days. So you see what's in the middle, adequate defenses, management decisions, technology, processes, systems, and people. Okay, so it's critical to identify where those risks are. Where are the holes in the Swiss cheese? Whenever performing risk assessment for an aseptic operation, it's critical to have a group of SMEs brainstorm and identify the various potential routes of contamination. This is not an easy task, but it's a necessary one. And when you talk about the SMEs that need to be at the table, it's not all engineers, it's not all microbiologists, not only QA people, and not only the product development people who understand the product and its vulnerabilities, maybe container closure integrity thing or functionality type of thing or whatever. It's all of those folks. And it's not novices, it's people that with experience and understanding, both academically and even more importantly, experientially. And no one has expressed this better than Dr. William White of University of Glasgow many years ago. He retired, but this is still the best quote. I'm 29 years into the industry, and it's still the best quote on aseptic processing. Unless the routes and sources of contamination are determined, the direction in which efforts should be made to contain it will be unknown. Still haven't seen a better quote. So another important point is that I shouldn't pop my peas. Okay, there we go. Another important point is that this is not a one-time only exercise, because understanding of risks will change during the process and the facility life cycle. To think that risk management is, or risk assessment is frozen in time when you haven't had any life cycle knowledge yet, you're, at the very beginning of learnings, it is obviously foolish. So QRM is a life cycle endeavor, and risk assessments are iterative. New risks may be identified throughout the life cycle and may need to you need to revisit your original evaluation of a risk, or you might make improvements that further reduce risks, etc. So this starts to more tangibly illustrate the variables in aseptic processing, and just to point out how complex aseptic processing is, this slide shows the variables at a macro level. There are many sub-variables in each of these circles. You see these bubbles, there's a bunch of sub-variables, and they don't exist in isolation, they interact. So the complexity of this multifactorial model is further underscored by the fact that these elements often, if any one of them fail on a given day, there could be a non-sterility consequence. So we're going to start looking at a few of these just to illustrate people. We're going to treat the topic of facility and room and aseptic line and the process, material flow, personnel flow, and layout all together. Briefly a little about HVAC, which actually interacts with environment, and the QA/QC role. And won't talk about disinfection today or media fills, though I will show you some examples in a few minutes of warning letters that kind of get into that topic. So let's look at people first. We all know by far the greatest source of contamination is people. And our aseptic guidance notes that even successfully qualified operations can be compromised by poor operational, maintenance, or personnel practices. To ensure maintenance of product sterility, it's critical for operators involved in aseptic activities to use aseptic technique at all times. And personnel should maintain gown quality and strictly adhere to appropriate techniques. Written procedures should adequately address circumstances under which personnel should be retrained, requalified, or reassigned to other areas. That's how important people are, obviously, to aseptic processing, and I think everybody knows that. Engineers, I think, in particular, understand the human-machine interface and ergonomics, and I will talk about that in one of our warning letter examples, too. The next macro factor that determines aseptic process control is the environment. Some excellent research work has been done by Sinclair and Towntaler on a production line. It was done a couple decades ago. And other work has been done by Lundquist and Reimuller and their graduate students. And it's been shown through these studies that the level of airborne microbes in the filling environment has a profound effect on the level of product contamination. Not a surprise, but also researchers found a definable direct relationship between the fraction of product contaminated and the level of microbes in the air surrounding the machine. And when we say surrounding the machine, we mean in the environment, the room environment, not the ISO 5 environment. So that paper is referring to the ISO 7 or ISO 8 environment. It was a BFS machine, blow-fill seal. So as the researchers propelled bacillus spores into the air, they aerosolized them. In the surrounding room, there was a directly proportional relationship, and it really does look like a 45-degree angle on the X and Y axis. A proportional relationship between the amount of bacillus spores propelled in the surrounding room and the number of contaminated units on the blow-fill seal line. A couple papers on that I highly recommend. Even more amazing was these were BFS lines in which units are only open to the environment for an extremely short time, and the mouth of the blow-fill seal unit is very small. And generally no human intervention whatsoever occurs in the fill zone after setup for a BFS machine. So we can't even say that the people conveyed the polluted air, the poor quality air, into the machine because it was blow-fill seal, highly automated. So always remember, engineers and others in the audience that are designing lines, that the background environment matters, even when humans aren't performing interventions. This also helps to explain why you should take adverse environmental monitoring findings seriously, even when the environmental monitoring excursions are in ancillary clean areas. So how about when there's turbulence at certain points on a line? And these are areas where operators may interact with the aseptic line. And how about if there's little or no barrier protection? Well, again, beautiful work by Lundquist and Reimuller. They prove that turbulent regions and wakes can play critical roles by causing accumulation of contaminants. And smoke studies are the best way for you to do a prove out of your design. If you're going to understand and have a proof of concept of whether your design actually as conceived actually works truly in situ, then we're talking about good smoke studies that illuminate design weaknesses that pose contamination hazards. And we've realized that a lot over the years. It took some years to come to that realization in our pre-approval inspections and in our surveillance inspections. And we've increased emphasis on evaluating smoke studies with a focus on ensuring that qualification work is sufficiently rigorous to identify potential contamination vulnerabilities. And I could tell you, we've seen some disappointments. We watch the smoke studies frequently on my floor. We have both the pre-approval group, Office of Process Facilities, and Office of Compliance, which oversees the problematic, inspections of problematic findings, what we call OEI recommendations. And we'll watch a smoke study video. We'll be like asking ourselves, a few experts around the table are looking at it, and they're, why did the company not catch this? Did they not see that turbulence right at the point where the intervention is being made? And you'll read the smoke study report, and part of scientific method is interpretation of data, and the interpretation of data, the smoke study, and looking at whether there's any perturbation of the airflow, it seems readily discernible. And sometimes you have to look at it 2 or 3 times to be sure, or even more, but that there's turbulence there. But somehow that smoke study report, and this happens a lot in the industry, doesn't note that there's turbulence. It accepts the design. We've already gotten this far. We have pressures. I guess that's part of it, I've been told, to market. We got to get this line running. Every day that we're not running this line is lost money. And that's understandable, but working in qualification timelines and doing smoke studies at the right time so you have some cushion to address those issues is also important. That's good planning. This is a very interesting one, and I love the robotics panel that you guys had last year at this conference. It was amazing, and I know you're doing it again. It's great. We're going to see more robotics. One day we'll have the gloveless isolator, and we'll be laughing about the days where a human actually interacted with an aseptic processing line in what we call an open RABs, or even a closed RABs. So we'll be there one day. It's going to take some time, as we've seen, of isolators, but there is interesting research that shows that the robotic arm, the way it moves, is pretty high velocity, and if it's not housed in an isolator or something very close to an isolator, like a closed RABs, then again, it has possibility to disturb the airflow. And we're talking about an airflow of 90 feet per minute, which I always, when I'm teaching this, I teach investigators in my Temple University class. This is 90 feet per minute, right? 90 feet per minute. That's how slow it is. It's not a lot of velocity. Right? So the robotic arm goes like this. So Lundquist and Reimiller, again, did just brilliant work. And they found, and I'm not recommending this in every case. I don't want people to be coming up to me and saying, so are you saying? Because I know people generalize. But in this case, that the robots caused entrainment of ambient room air into the clean zone, and they had to increase the velocity of unidirectional airflow instead of 0.45 meters per second, plus or minus 20%, higher up to 0.5 to 1.0 meter per second. That's double the normal velocity. And that's how they could actually ensure that poor quality air didn't get pulled in by a very fast-moving robotic arm. The air velocity mitigated the issue. Again, I would strongly recommend anybody building a line today use closed RABs and isolators, and I do think there's a good place for open RABs too. I'm not, we're not abandoning that either, of course. So here's another good illustration, this one from ISO, that shows how aseptic line separation from the surrounding environment helps to reduce risk. This figure shows the increasing level of separation as physical barriers protect an aseptic zone. Generally speaking, as separation increases, product sterility is more assured. A laminar flow hood is an example of very low separation. And I don't think I have a pointer, but, oh, yeah, okay. And that's at the very bottom where the X and Y axes meet. That's a laminar flow hood. And then a closed isolator is in the upper right-hand quarter, and that affords a very high degree of separation. So just as an example, use of an isolator greatly reduces the major hazard from personnel activity in the surrounding room environment. In contrast, poor personnel behaviors in the environment surrounding a traditional line would pose a substantial hazard. So less and less the human becomes important because they're not directly interacting in the line and can't affect the inner environment when you have a closed isolator or an open isolator, essentially. And this shows the shift from 20th century paradigm, that 1950s, 1960s infrastructure, to the 21st century paradigm. One shows a low capability line of the past, and the other a line that removes direct human-machine interaction from the aseptic process. And this slide summarizes the move from old to the new paradigm. This is risk management, right? At the design stage. Risk reduction, moving from old, antiquated facilities with inadequate room design, not enough space, poor air volume and airflow, and inadequate exhaust of polluted air from the room, and air changes insufficient, poor material and personnel flow, inefficient, unstable processes that require frequent starts and stops to correct major problems and make adjustments. Moving from open to closed process, unit operations to integrated operations. When you integrate a transfer, you eliminate the risk that used to be the human actually conveying from the aseptic line 20 feet sometimes, or even more, even opening up a door and going to another room to the LIO. That's frequent, actually, pretty frequent. And integrating the transfer right into the LIO greatly reduces the risk by taking the human out of it. The dry heat tunnel used to be a batch oven. If you have a batch oven for dry heat, it's probably not a good idea. In almost all cases, there'd be a lot of focus on that in inspection, and that is passé in most cases. I could think of extremely limited circumstance where it may still work for a particular niche, small-scale operation. But unit operations to integrated, that's another example where you have integrated the dry heat oven right into the line. Seamless transfer. Obviously, there's a lot to manage of air flow there and things like that with the isolator, but it's, again, move the human out of it. Manually intensive operations versus automation. You can't measure a human. You can precisely measure the state of calibration of equipment and its performance. It's very hard to measure human performance. So we talk about metrics and quantitative versus semi-quantitative approaches. We get more into a science-based industry that understands where there's risks when we move to automation. So in 2019, human error is still a very common root cause of contamination in manually intensive and limited barrier operations. We clearly need to do better. I also know there's a lot of great examples in this audience of people who are the role models for moving from old operations to new operations. So kudos to you. I want to talk a little about RABs and definitions. We did not have a RABs definition, and our old friend Jack Lisford urged us for years to get a definition into our guidelines, and we listened. A few years ago, we published a compliance program which defines two types of RABs, open and closed. We get in discuss in Q&A tomorrow about the terminology, because there's a lot of terminology around RABs, I know that. But this was a step forward, at least, that FDA defined RABs, because we didn't discuss the term RABs in the aseptic processing guidance. We talked about barriers, and RABs was a new term at the time. RABs was only invented, that term, coined a year a few years before the aseptic guidance was published. And it really took on a life of its own over the years, and it's become the official term. But while not as comprehensive as isolators and removing humans as a source of product contamination, closed RABS processing lines can add significant assurance as long as they are operated properly. The same is often true for open RABs, although we have seen some overly liberal uses of the term RABs. I think we all know what I'm talking about, right? There's been a paper or two recently on that. People are retrofitting lines, for example, and it's an ill-advised retrofit with an existing line, and because they put some, plexiglass around it, and they could open a door, which they probably have to do a lot because it has so many starts and stops because it's not a capable line in the cases I'm thinking of. It's not a RABS. That's restricted access, right? Infrequent access. Very, very rare instances you should be opening the RABS door. Almost all interventions in processing, during processing, should be done through installed gauntlet gloves. So any open door intervention can compromise the advantages of barrier separation, and firms who allow for this type of RABs, the open RABs, to be open for anything, but exceptional interventions are not meeting the intent or reaping the advantages of the RABs design concept. Most of our policy initiatives, or incentives rather, are reserved for firms who adopt isolator technology, though I'll talk a little more about RABs in a minute and some incentives there. This slide summarizes FDA's guidance on the topic of media fill program incentives, in which only isolators are eligible for less media fills per year. The minimum is 2 per line per shift per year. Our FDA question and answer on our website notes that's the minimum expectation, 2 per line per shift per year. And all lines are expected to follow the minimum media fill frequencies except for isolators. Smaller number of units to represent the aseptic processing largest batch size also. Isolators are allowed to have a smaller number of units to simulate the operation. Still puts stress on the media fill protocol design. The program needs to be still rigorous and representative. And as you have less and less units, you have less and less opportunity to actually do all the simulations you do need to do with isolators. So glove entries and exits, even pressure in the room, even though isolators generally are not influenced much by the room. We have seen some instances where changes in pressure, quick change of pressure in the room or moving into gloves can actually have an effect in the inner isolator environment. So these type of things need to be simulated, and other things, other interventions that occur in isolation technology need to be properly simulated and accurately simulated. So this is another point that Dr. Woodcock talked about in her paper. We have explicitly put in policy, and this is what she was referring to. She had directed us to find ways to disincentivize archaic technologies that represent an unacceptable risk to the patient, and to incentivize modern technology so that we could get into the 21st century. I mean, we're almost in 2020 now. And so we tell investigators in our new compliance program to cover systems in areas that present the greatest risk of product contamination or require strict control of processing parameters. If a firm has several aseptic processing lines, cover the lines that require most manipulations in the ISO 5 area. Doesn't mean they're not going to cover your isolator, they're gonna, but it should be much more efficient inspection. Now let's spend the last 10 minutes, or 15 minutes I got, right? Yeah. To talk about not modernization, but the segment of the sterile drug industry that has not yet upgraded their facilities. And I'll talk about some of the warning letters that they have been issued, as well as a withhold recommendation. I'll share a few examples here. In this case, aseptic breaches by operators were observed during the FDA inspection. And as they started to look at the data, the investigators, and this was a European site, they saw multiple media fills had contamination. And there is low-level contamination in some of the media fills. And one that had 30 positive units. This was an open RABS, but not operated like a RABS. It's not within the concept of a RABS. If you have an open RABS and you operate it well, you'll be doing just fine. They attributed the media fill contamination to aseptic technique breaches by the operators in the RABs. These involved setup, filling, and changing of a filling tank. Minimal investigations were done. They didn't really do anything more than a superficial investigation, didn't get to root cause. Microbes in media fill units were not identified. Major generic manufacturer, by the way. And we said in the letter, it's imperative that you identify microbial isolates to adequately understand potential sources and scope of the contamination. Remember what Dr. White said from University of Glasgow about that. The microbe tells you a lot, and you actually could follow a route of contamination through a facility sometimes when you ID microbes. You can understand how they got to the scene of the crime. Your firm also had multiple sterility failures. So we had the media fill failures, now we see sterility failures. Now, what happened to those sterility failures? They blame the lab. Seen this before? Poor investigations again, assume false positives, although the sterility testing was done in an isolator using a closed testing system within the isolator, the closed isolator, closed within closed. We told them to provide a full reassessment of your operation and thorough CAPA. This line had hazardous human-machine interfaces that were that posed serious contamination risk. Multiple stopper addition issues, even door placement issues on the plexiglass barrier around this line. I don't think they claimed it was a RABS. But it was more of a 1980s line where we started putting plexiglass around the lines and opening the doors, but we didn't have the installed gloves yet, and so it's like a 1980s kind of line. But how it was being operated, more stresses on the procedures and the practices around those kind of lines, as I've discussed. It's really still an open line, essentially. They're opening the door all the time. And these are the vials. I've seen a video of this line, the smoke study. Here's the vials. Here's the door. That close. And the door was big. So they open this big door like this. What do you think's going on to the air? ISO 7 surrounding room, and then they close the door. What do you think's going on to the air? Influx of room air, right? Vials are that far away from the door. Open vials before filling and stoppering. So I think that's enough of that, other than to just say that we are saying this a lot in our responses now when we see flaws in aseptic processing design. A comprehensive independent identification of all contamination hazards needs to be done. Obviously, FMEA or something like that should have been done from the outset. And as I said, risk assessment is iterative. These risks should have been detected by management, frontline supervisors and directors and above, and management review should have taken place. Independent risk assessment that covers, among other things, all human interactions with the ISO 5 area, equipment placement and ergonomics, air quality in the ISO 5 area and surrounding room, facility layout, personal flow and material flow. FDA is getting very specific. We're trying to facilitate compliance. We don't want them to be recidivist, what we call recidivist. We don't want them to come back with OAI later. We want all companies to be acceptable in the industry, VAI and NEI, hopefully. That's what we want. We don't want to see you again at headquarters, only under positive circumstances like conferences like this. So that's what we're doing to try to facilitate compliance, be more specific on the things you need to do, apply risk management to remediate. This is worrisome. I mentioned that environmental control loss, like at NECC, the pharmacy, which is the worst ever event in the United States history, but it had to do with a basic loss of environmental control, or the more nuanced type that still leads to contamination, is the reason why almost all failures take place in the industry, and there's usually a personnel interaction with that. Remember I said it's multivariate, right? It's always 2 or 3 things. And well, here, leakers were occurring in ophthalmics, and cracks did not occur immediately, so 100% inspection did not detect the leakers. Instead, the leakers often developed days after the batch was completed. That low detectability raises the FMEA score, right? Low detectability, lower probability of, higher probability of a defect getting out. The firm attempted CAPA for 3 years. This was a persistent problem. 1,500 complaints, more than that, of leakers. Complaints from customers, 1,500. And that's, you know, again, complaints probably happen 1 to 10% of the people that experience a defect will report it. So we told them to do, look at bullet 4, and then I'll move on from this slide, but provide a process capability assessment. We're talking CPK and PPK of aseptic manufacturing line, and that includes PPM and other things that you can do, PPM meaning defects per million. These kind of assessments, Six Sigma type of approaches to see how frequent critical defects take place. And it involves a lot of in-process data and then post-production data. In this case, simulations were not performed at sufficient frequency and did not adequately represent aseptic conditions. This firm did a best-case media fill. Extra cleaning and disinfection was done before the media fill. So the value of a media fill, as I mentioned, if you've seen me speak before about media fills, is they're diagnostic. Like when you bring your car in every 6 months and they do a diagnostic on your transmission to see if it's an operating order, and you can drive out and feel confident for the next 6 months. That's what a media fill does. Contamination risks are invisible until you actually simulate your current operations to see how you're doing. And that's the opportunity. If you're proud of your operation and you're confident in your operation, you shouldn't have to go to extra measures to prejudice or bias a study by doing extra cleaning and disinfection. You should follow your normal operations and see whether there's contamination, right? So they also weren't doing 2 media fills per year. In this case, in a pre-approval inspection, the investigator found that they were only integrity testing RABS gloves weekly, and in fact, sometimes they didn't do the integrity testing. They would forego the integrity test. They would do a visual check instead. But even then, the data show gloves were routinely found to be non-integral. Preventive maintenance means replacing gloves before they become non-integral. And part of PM has to be the integrity testing. With a mechanical device, that should be done daily. Certainly visual inspection should be done daily. They also found that non-sterile supplies were being brought into the RABs. So this is a RABs. We're happy to see a RABs when we show up. They're bringing non-sterile supplies in using non-integral gloves. We withheld approval. Application was not approved. This is an important point that I wanted to share from PHSS. They presented this, I think, last year, that the interaction of the glove can cause the induction of contaminants into the RABS environment or isolator environment. If gloves are non-integral, they can be a vector of contamination, and there's a pressurization effect that can push microbes into the isolator, and they've shown that, so kudos to PHSS. To conclude, I'm going to talk about modernization for a couple more slides, and I'm going to look forward to our Q&A tomorrow. When you are doing a assessment of whether your design concept is moving in the right direction to prevent contamination, you should think about these 3 things: separation, automation, and integration. I think I've illustrated all of them in my presentation today. And also advanced analytics. A lot more can be done with big data. There's things you can do with environmental data to track organisms and their path through an aseptic processing facility, and identify risks on an earlier basis, and diagnose root causes. Advanced analytics means, for example, or advanced testing, genotyping for sterility test investigations. I've seen companies do that for about 15 to 20 years now. If you have a media fill or sterility failure investigation, you're not genotyping, that might be penny-wise, pound-foolish, because it can be very valuable in getting to a conclusion. To succeed, an organization, succeed at modernization and innovation, you need to have a critical mass of highly educated workers with a lot of domain experience that engage in formal and informal exchange of ideas, and they need to be able to interact with the outside, external environments where you learn things at conferences, for example, and you read papers published by others sharing their lessons learned. That's how innovation happens. That's how change happens. Otherwise, the unknown will not be accepted by the organization. In short, innovation is a social process. Talking to your colleagues at other companies, networks, and conferences like this, not that I'm advertising for ISPE, but honestly, I wouldn't have done it as well. You know, I think I did pretty good. My old boss there, Joe, Plenary, might tell me I didn't, but I don't know. He was my boss when I wrote the Aseptic Guidance, it's the chair, with 8 other dedicated FDA colleagues. And if we hadn't come to these conferences and heard practical insights from you, we might have written some ill-advised things in the Aseptic Guidance, regulators thinking theoretically and not thinking practically. And thanks to ISPE and PDA and PHSS and other organizations, it made a real difference. And we're not as afraid of innovation, innovative technology because of these kind of conferences and because of the papers we read. And all of you, please keep publishing because they're really appreciated. But the environment that has inertia in it and is not willing to reduce risks to product quality by thinking in new ways, they're at the bottom of this triangle. The ones that are on the way and are starting to surface issues and talk about things and think of ideas and solutions that are beyond the narrow parochial groupthink. Well, those that are starting to move beyond that can get to gradual incremental improvement, but only the ones that really embrace technological possibilities, and that includes, obviously, up to the executive management who hold the purse strings, only they are capable of radical change. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you, Rick. Great presentation. As always, great insight into what's happening and what you see out there in inspections. And I would like to hold questions for now, because if you do have questions, please put them into Pigeonhole. It'll make our discussion groups tomorrow, or our Q&A with the FDA representatives tomorrow much more interesting. And I've seen one question already popping up from the audience during this talk. So please go ahead and do that. Also, I would like to ask you to take a minute and rate the session before you leave. That's on the app, ISPE app. It'll help us work on the events. And next on our agenda is the networking break in the exhibit hall, which is Salon A and A to D, where we have all the exhibits, and thanks to our sponsors right here. And then we continue with the education sessions at 11 prompt in the different tracks. Track 1, Advanced Aseptic in Salon F. Track 2, Aseptic Cell and Gene Therapy in Salon G. And Track 3, Preventing Cross-Contamination in Salon E. And I think that's all for now. Thank you very much for your participation, and have a great conference. Thank you.